The Vorthak Empire had been the terror of space for 300 years. These creatures looked like giant insects, with black claws as sharp as knives and thick armor covering their bodies. They were hunters who traveled from planet to planet, taking the strongest beings they could find for their twisted games. No one had ever been able to stop them. Commander Krax was the leader of their biggest warship, a massive black vessel called the Razor Claw. He stood in the control room, looking at a screen that showed 12 of their hunting ships moving toward a small blue and green planet that orbited around a yellow sun. This was going to be another easy hunt, just like all the others. His second-in-command, a younger Vorthak with clicking teeth, gave him the report. The creatures on this planet called it Earth. They walked on 2 legs like many species, but they had no claws, no fangs, no armor, and no advanced weapons. They seemed perfect for hunting. The Vorthak had studied them from far away and decided these humans would make good prey for their great hunt, a ceremony where they captured the strongest beings from conquered worlds. Krax felt excited as he thought about the hunt ahead. His many eyes, which could see in different directions at once, sparkled with anticipation. In all his years as a hunter, he had never met a species that could fight back against the Vorthak. These humans looked even weaker than most. This would be over quickly. The Vorthak always followed the same pattern when they found new prey. They would send a message to the planet, demanding that the inhabitants surrender their strongest fighters. Most species would either beg for mercy or try to fight and fail. Either way, the Vorthak always won. Krax gave the order to send their usual message to Earth. The communication went out across space, translated into the human language. It was simple and direct, the way all Vorthak messages were. They told the humans to give up their best warriors for the hunt, and warned that fighting back would only make their suffering last longer. Then, they waited for the response. Krax expected to hear crying, begging, or angry threats. That was what they always heard. But when the answer came back from Earth, it was something completely different. The translation system worked fine, but the sound that came through was strange. It was not fear or anger. It sounded like the humans were amused, as if someone had told them a funny joke. Down on Earth, Captain Lee Jun stood looking out the window of his spacecraft, the UEN Determination. Even though 12 huge alien warships surrounded his planet, he looked calm and relaxed. He had seen the enemy ships arrive and had been expecting this moment for a long time. Lieutenant Park Hana, his tactical officer, was working at her control station. She looked up and reported what they had learned about the alien fleet. 12 ships, all heavily armed, and they were sending some kind of challenge about hunting humans. It was exactly what Earth's military leaders had been preparing for. Jun could not help but smile when he heard this news. He asked his lieutenant what their orders were. Park Hana told him that Admiral Kim Dae, the commander of all Earth space forces, had given them permission to use Code 7 protocols. This was the signal they had been waiting for. Jun's smile grew bigger and turned into a grin. He told his crew to signal the rest of Earth's fleet and give these alien hunters a proper welcome. All around Earth's orbit, human ships that had been hiding behind the moon and in asteroid fields began to move into position. The sound that had confused the Vorthak was coming from communication channels between human ships. It was laughter, but not the nervous kind that people make when they are scared. This was the kind of laughter that comes from professionals who are about to do a job they really enjoy. The humans were not afraid of these alien hunters. They were looking forward to meeting them. The Vorthak commander sent another message, this time more aggressive and threatening. He told the humans that their weak ships could not possibly stand against the mighty Vorthak fleet. He was trying to scare them into surrendering without a fight. But Lieutenant Park had the perfect response ready. She keyed in the reply that would be sent back to the alien commander. It was polite but casual, almost friendly. She thanked them for the warning and added that the humans had been getting bored lately. It was as if the Vorthak had just offered them an entertaining game instead of a deadly threat. This response made Commander Krax pause and think. Something was not right here. The humans were acting like no prey species he had ever encountered before. They should have been terrified. But instead they seemed almost happy to see him. Captain Lee Jun stood at the large window of his spaceship, the UEN Determination, watching the 12 massive alien vessels that had just appeared around Earth. These ships were unlike anything humans had ever seen before. They were dark, angular, and covered in what looked like sharp spikes and armor plating. Each one was easily 3 times the size of Earth's largest warships, and they moved through space with the confident grace of predators who had never known defeat. Despite the overwhelming size and number of these alien ships, Jun remained completely calm. His hands were steady as he held his coffee cup, and his breathing was even and controlled. This was not the reaction of someone who was afraid or surprised. In fact, if you looked closely, you might notice the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth, as if he was trying not to smile. Lieutenant Park Hana worked quickly at her control station, her fingers dancing across the holographic displays as she gathered information about their unexpected visitors. The alien ships had appeared without warning, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation around Earth's orbital defense platforms. Their arrival had been sudden, but not entirely unexpected. Earth's long-range sensors had been tracking unusual energy signatures for weeks. Park looked up from her instruments and gave her report to the captain. 12 ships, all of them broadcasting the same message on multiple frequencies. The universal translators were working overtime to decode the alien language, but the meaning was becoming clear. These creatures were not here for peaceful first contact or trade negotiations. They were here to hunt. The message was simple and brutal. The aliens called themselves the Vorthak, and they were demanding that Earth surrender its strongest fighters for something they called the Great Hunt. It was not a request or even a threat exactly. It was more like a farmer telling his livestock what was going to happen to them. The tone was matter-of-fact, as if resistance was not even considered a possibility. Jun listened to this ultimatum with growing amusement. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. Though he had imagined first contact might be more diplomatic, the military strategists had run thousands of simulations about what might happen when humanity finally met other intelligent species among the stars. Some scenarios involved peaceful cooperation, others involved territorial disputes or resource conflicts. But this particular situation, where aliens showed up demanding tribute like some kind of space pirates, had been considered one of the more likely possibilities. The captain asked his tactical officer what their response options were. Park Hana checked her orders and confirmed that Admiral Kim Dae, the Supreme Commander of Earth's Unified Space Defense Forces, had already authorized Code 7 protocols. This was not a drill or a diplomatic incident that required careful negotiation. This was exactly the scenario that Code 7 had been designed for, and every human military officer knew what it meant. Code 7 was the authorization to engage hostile alien forces with full military response. It meant that all the secret weapons projects, all the hidden ship designs, and all the combat strategies that Earth had been developing in preparation for this day could finally be put to use. The smile that had been tugging at the corner of Jun's mouth finally broke free into a full grin. He gave the order to signal the rest of Earth's fleet and prepare to give their alien visitors a proper welcome. This was the moment that changed everything. All around Earth's solar system, human ships that had been carefully hidden began to power up their engines and move into attack positions. Some had been concealed behind the moon. Others had been disguised as asteroids or space debris. The humans had learned long ago that the best defense was to make sure your enemy underestimated you. The communication channels between human ships came alive with chatter, and the sound that emerged was something the Vorthak had never heard from a prey species before. It was laughter, but not the hysterical laughter of beings driven mad by fear. This was the confident, anticipatory laughter of professionals who were about to do a job they had trained for their entire lives. It was the sound of hunters who had just spotted their quarry. The Vorthak commander, clearly frustrated by the humans' unexpected response, sent another message. This time his tone was more aggressive and threatening. He boasted about Vorthak military superiority and warned that human ships were too weak to stand against their advanced technology. He was trying to intimidate the humans into surrendering before the fighting even began. Lieutenant Park had already prepared the human response. With Captain Jun's approval, she transmitted back to the alien fleet. Her message was polite, almost friendly, but with an undertone that suggested the humans were not taking the threats seriously. She thanked the Vorthak for their warning and casually mentioned that Earth's forces had been getting bored lately, as if these alien hunters had just provided some much-needed entertainment rather than a deadly threat. This response sent shockwaves through the Vorthak fleet. No prey species had ever responded to their ultimatums with casual dismissal and amusement. Commander Crack stared at his tactical display in complete disbelief. What he was seeing should have been impossible. His mighty Vorthak hunting fleet, which had conquered dozens of worlds without breaking a sweat, was being torn apart by creatures that his intelligence reports had described as weak and primitive. The humans were not just fighting back, they were doing things that defied everything the Vorthak knew about space combat. The human ships moved like nothing Cracks had ever seen before. Instead of following predictable attack patterns like every other species, they seemed to dance through space in formations that looked almost artistic. Some of their vessels would suddenly accelerate toward Earth's gravity well, using the planet's own gravitational pull to slingshot around and attack from completely unexpected angles. Others would group together and then scatter like a school of fish, making it impossible for Vorthak targeting systems to lock onto them. But what really confused Cracks was how the humans had turned absolutely everything into a weapon. Ships that looked like simple cargo haulers were launching massive containers filled with metal debris at incredible speeds. Mining vessels that should have been easy targets were using their industrial equipment to grab Vorthak ships and hold them in place while other human vessels moved in for the kill. His sensor operator, a nervous young Vorthak whose voice kept breaking with stress, called out urgent reports from his station. The humans were using construction equipment as weapons of war. Giant space cranes were swinging wrecking balls at Vorthak fighters. Industrial welding lasers were cutting through armor that should have been impenetrable. Even garbage collection ships were getting involved, using their magnetic collectors to grab Vorthak missiles right out of space and throw them back at their own ships. On the main viewing screen, Cracks watched in amazement as a human ship called the Lucky Strike completely destroyed one of his best destroyers. The Lucky Strike looked like nothing more than a simple cargo transport, the kind of vessel that should have been running away from the battle. Instead, it had somehow loaded its cargo bays with shipping containers filled with dense metal ore and was firing them like enormous bullets at Vorthak ships. The containers hit with such force that they punched straight through military-grade armor plating. What made it even more insulting was that the Lucky Strike's captain seemed to be treating the whole thing like a game. The Vorthak communication. Interceptors picked up his transmissions to other human ships, and his tone was casual and almost playful. He was giving advice to other captains about the best angles for container shots and making jokes about Vorthak ship design. According to their translation systems, he had described Vorthak armor as being about as tough as wet cardboard. The situation got even worse when Captain Yang Wu's mining ship, the Prosperity, managed to capture 3 Vorthak fighters using nothing but mining nets and tractor beams. Yang's voice came crackling through the intercepted communications, asking his fleet commanders if he should reel in his catch like fish. His tone was so casual and relaxed that it made Crax's armored shell crawl with unease. These humans were not desperate defenders fighting for their lives. They were having fun. Lieutenant Commander Choi Min was leading a squadron of small human fighters in maneuvers that should have been suicide missions. She was taking her tiny ships directly into Earth's magnetic field, an area where most electronic systems would fail completely. But somehow the human ships kept working, while the electromagnetic interference completely blinded Vorthak sensors and targeting systems. Her pilots were broadcasting their activities like they were sports commentators describing a racing event, complete with jokes and casual observations about Vorthak flying skills. Choi's voice came through the communication channels, describing how her squadron was using Earth's own magnetic field as a shield while they picked off Vorthak ships one by one. She was giving her pilots advice in the same tone a teacher might use to help students with a homework problem. The humans had somehow turned a deadly space battle into what sounded like a training exercise. The most disturbing thing for Cracks was realizing that the humans had been planning for this moment. Every piece of civilian equipment that they were using as weapons had been modified in advance. The cargo containers were perfectly weighted for maximum impact. The mining nets were exactly the right size to capture Vorthak fighters. The construction equipment had been upgraded with military-grade targeting systems. These humans had spent years preparing to fight an enemy they had never met before. Krax found himself growling in frustration and disbelief. His compound eyes darted between multiple displays showing the destruction of his fleet. According to every database the Vorthak had, humans were supposed to be a primitive species with basic technology and no military experience against advanced alien civilizations. But the evidence of his own senses told a completely different story. The wreckage floating around Earth belonged to Vorthak ships, not human ones. Dr. Nam Hyun had been studying alien psychology for most of his career, but he had never expected to get such a perfect test subject as the Vorthak Empire. From his position aboard the research vessel Curiosity, he was broadcasting live analysis of Vorthak battle tactics directly into their own communication channels. His voice carried the patient, slightly disappointed tone of a university professor reviewing a particularly poor student essay. The doctor explained to anyone listening, including the increasingly frustrated Vorthak commanders, that their tactical approach showed a dangerous over-reliance on fear and intimidation. They had clearly never learned to adapt when their psychological warfare failed to work. He pointed out that even first-year students at Earth's military academies were taught more flexible thinking than what the Vorthak were demonstrating in this battle. What made his commentary particularly devastating was how polite and helpful it sounded. Dr. Nam was not insulting the Vorthak or mocking them. Instead, he was treating them like students who simply needed better instruction. He offered detailed explanations of where their strategies were going wrong, complete with suggestions for improvement. The fact that he was doing this while human forces were actively destroying their fleet made it even more psychologically damaging. Admiral Kim Dae watched the entire battle unfold from the command bridge of his flagship, the Indomitable. Unlike the Vorthak commanders who were screaming orders and threats, Kim remained calm and collected throughout the engagement. He observed each phase of the battle with the detached interest of someone watching a chess match rather than a life or death struggle. From his position, Kim could see something that the Vorthak could not. The human forces were not just winning through superior technology or numbers. They were winning because they approached warfare completely differently than any species the Vorthak had ever encountered. Where other civilizations relied on traditional military tactics, humans were improvising solutions using whatever tools they had available. His communications officer regularly updated him on the progress of various human boarding parties that were capturing Vorthak ships intact. These were not elite special forces using advanced military equipment. Instead, they were ordinary soldiers, engineers, and even civilian volunteers who were treating the invasion of alien warships like an interesting technical problem to solve. Sergeant Oh Young-soo had managed to take control of a Vorthak flagship's engine room, using nothing more than industrial cargo straps, some basic tools, and what he modestly described as common-sense problem-solving. He had studied the ship's design during the approach, identified the most vulnerable access points, and then simply walked in through their own maintenance hatches. The Vorthak crew had been so focused on external threats that they never considered someone might use their own ship's design against them. The most psychologically devastating aspect of the human approach was how casual and friendly they remained. Throughout the entire battle, even as they systematically dismantled the Vorthak fleet, human forces continued to offer helpful advice and constructive criticism. When Vorthak commanders sent increasingly desperate and angry messages, human tactical analysts would respond with cheerful suggestions about better strategies they could have used. These analysts treated the Vorthak like amateur players in a strategy game rather than terrifying galactic predators. They would point out missed opportunities, explain why certain formations were ineffective, and even offer to share tactical manuals that might help the Vorthak improve their performance in future engagements. The fact that they were doing this while actively capturing Vorthak ships made their advice sound almost like friendly coaching rather than enemy taunts. Commander Krax found himself receiving detailed tactical critiques from humans who seemed genuinely interested in helping him become a better military commander. They explained why his formation choices were predictable, how his communication patterns revealed his strategy to enemy forces, and what he should have done differently to avoid having his entire fleet captured. The humans delivered this advice, with the same helpful tone that a driving instructor might use to correct a student's mistakes. The psychological breaking point came when Corporal Lee Na-young single-handedly disabled an entire Vorthak cruiser using nothing but the ship's own instruction manual. She had somehow obtained a copy of Vorthak technical specifications, studied their systems during her approach, and then systematically shut down their ship by following their own maintenance procedures in reverse order. What made this achievement even more remarkable was that she accomplished it while humming an old Korean folk song that her grandmother had taught her as a child. The tune was peaceful and cheerful, completely at odds with the fact that she was infiltrating an enemy warship. Her casual, almost absent-minded approach to what should have been a terrifying mission perfectly captured the human attitude toward this entire conflict. The Vorthak had built their entire empire on the idea that they were the galaxy's ultimate predators, creatures so terrifying that other species would surrender rather than face them in battle. But the humans were treating them like an interesting puzzle to solve, rather than a deadly threat to fear. This complete reversal of their expected psychological dynamic was more damaging to Vorthak morale than any weapon could have been. The Vorthak sensor operator's chittering grew more frantic by the second. His compound eyes darted between multiple displays, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The readings couldn't be correct, but the evidence was right there on every screen. "Sir," he called out to Commander Krax, his voice breaking with disbelief. "The humans are using construction equipment as kinetic weapons." Krax turned all four of his eyes toward the main display, watching in horror as a human vessel designated as the Lucky Strike maneuvered with impossible precision. According to their intelligence files, it was nothing more than a cargo hauler, the kind of slow, ungainly ship used for moving bulk materials between planets. But somehow this lumbering civilian vessel had just disabled one of their most advanced destroyers. The human ship had launched what appeared to be ordinary shipping containers, but each one struck the Vorthak destroyer at exactly the right angle and velocity to overwhelm its shields and cripple its engines. It wasn't luck or desperation. It was calculated, precise, and absolutely devastating. "Mining rig Prosperity to Fleet Command," crackled a human voice over their intercepted communications. The tone was so casual, it made Krax's carapace shiver. "We've got 3 more bugs tangled up in our nets. Should we reel them in?" The casual reference to his warriors as bugs was insulting enough, but what truly terrified Krax was the tone. These weren't desperate defenders fighting for their lives. They were enjoying themselves. The humans were treating this life-or-death battle like some kind of recreational activity. On another screen, he watched Lieutenant Commander Choi Min lead a squadron of fighters in a maneuver that should have been impossible. Her ships were using Earth's own magnetic field to create interference patterns that completely blinded Vorthak sensors. While her pilots executed these incredibly complex movements, they were broadcasting running commentary like they were narrating a sports match. "Blue leader coming around the magnetic pole," came one pilot's voice. "Looks like the bugs are trying to compensate for the interference, but they're about 3 moves behind." "Copy that, Blue 3. I've got a clear shot at their command cluster. This is almost too easy." Krax felt his hunting instincts screaming at him to retreat, but his pride as a Vorthak warrior kept him frozen in place. His species had conquered 17 star systems through pure predatory dominance. They were the apex hunters of the galaxy, feared by every other species they had encountered. "This isn't possible," he growled to himself, watching more of his ships fall to human tactics that defied every military doctrine he had ever learned. "They're just primitives." But the wreckage of his hunting fleet floating in space around Earth suggested otherwise. Each destroyed Vorthak vessel told the same story. Overwhelming superiority turned into crushing defeat by beings who seemed to treat impossible challenges as interesting puzzles to solve. The psychological warfare was perhaps even more devastating than the physical destruction. Dr. Nam Hyun's voice filled the Vorthak communication channels, his tone professorial and mildly disappointed, like a teacher correcting a particularly slow student. Analysis of Vorthak tactical doctrine shows a concerning reliance on intimidation over adaptation, the human academic announced calmly. Frankly, our military academy cadets demonstrate more flexibility in their training exercises. I would recommend a complete review of your strategic methodology. From the bridge of the human flagship Indomitable, Admiral Kim Day observed the battle with the kind of calm attention that Krax found deeply unsettling. The human commander wasn't frantically issuing orders or showing any signs of stress. He was simply watching, occasionally nodding with approval as his forces executed their unconventional strategies. "A report from Sergeant Oh Young-soo," announced the Admiral's communications officer. He secured the enemy flagship's engine room using cargo straps and what he describes as basic problem-solving skills. Krax watched in disbelief as human boarding parties captured Vorthak vessels using techniques that seemed to have been borrowed from industrial safety protocols and extreme sports rather than military doctrine. They moved through the ships with the confidence of maintenance workers rather than soldiers, systematically neutralizing threats with improvised solutions that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. The most humiliating part was how helpful the humans were being. As Krax's increasingly desperate communications filled the channels, human tactical analysts responded with cheerful suggestions about better strategies the Vorthak could have used. They pointed out tactical errors with the patience of teachers, all while systematically capturing or destroying every ship in his fleet. The breaking point came when Corporal Lee Na-young single-handedly disabled a Vorthak cruiser by following its own technical manual. She had somehow accessed their ship's systems and used their own protocols against them, all while humming an old Earth song that her grandmother used to sing. The casual, almost cheerful way she dismantled a ship designed to be impregnable was perhaps the most terrifying thing Krax had ever witnessed. Hours later, Krax found himself aboard his own flagship, now under human control. The irony wasn't lost on him as he faced Admiral Kim Day in what had once been his command center. The human leader looked completely relaxed, almost casual, as he studied the Vorthak warrior with curious rather than hostile eyes. "Your species prides itself on being apex predators," Kim said thoughtfully, as if he were discussing an interesting scientific observation. "Single environment specialists, very efficient within your particular niche." "How?" Krax's translator struggled to process his chittering, which had become increasingly frantic. "We are the galaxy's greatest hunters. We have conquered 17 systems." Kim's response was that soft laughter that had confused and terrified the Vorthak from the very beginning of this encounter. It wasn't mocking or cruel, just genuinely amused, as if Krax had said something unintentionally funny. "Commander, humans have spent our entire evolutionary history as both predator and prey," Kim explained patiently. "We learned to adapt, improvise, and overcome challenges that would break single-minded hunters. We had to, because everything on our world was trying to either eat us or compete with us for resources." The Admiral gestured toward the viewport, where Earth hung in space. The planet showed clear signs of the battle, with orbital installations damaged and atmospheric burns, visible from space, but it was far from broken. "You were apex predators on your world," Kim continued. "We turned our entire planet into a training ground. Every challenge you've mastered in your specialized environment, we've faced a dozen variations of on Earth. As the surviving Vorthak, vessels prepared for their long journey home, their holds empty and their pride completely shattered, Kim offered his final words to the defeated commander. "Tell the galaxy that Earth is off limits from now on. And remember, Commander, you heard us laughing because we were being friendly. You really don't want to see what happens when humans stop finding things funny." The Vorthak Empire's warning broadcast reached every corner of known space within a standard month. The message was simple, direct, and absolutely clear. Avoid the third planet of the Sol system. The inhabitants are not prey. They are something far worse. They are humans, and they chuckle at danger.